Hello and welcome to this series of lectures on post-structural theories. After the advent of post-structuralism, after its skeptical review of the very idea of literary theory, after its skeptical dismissal of language as a sensible sense-making mechanism, humanities generally started looking at extra linguistic ideas, in fact, interdisciplinary ideas, as key methods to understand culture, understand the world, and understand the art that was being created. A major trajectory, in fact, a major field of inquiry that developed in this wake is the study of space. Space as an important marker, an important cultural marker. This idea became popular in the 1960s. You can see that, the beginning of this change in the understanding of space actually happens in 1950s. One of the key texts in this area, The Poetics of Space, came out in 1952. It was written by the French guru Gaston Bachelard. Gaston Bachelard is sometimes considered the Heidegger of this field. He basically, you can actually think of a before and after scenario. After Bachelard moves into this field, space was not looked at as the same anymore. Understanding space becomes key to understanding art, understanding architecture. Why? Understanding the very ideas of civilizational evolution. So, what exactly was different in Bachelard's understanding of space? What does he mean by the poetics of space? And how does that revolutionize the field of study of space? You would also see that Michel Foucault, another French philosopher, another post-structural French philosopher, he also contributes much to the understanding of space. So let us just put together these ideas and see how this develops. What exactly is space as understood by these French philosophers? How does it make a difference to research in humanities? What are the possibilities of using spatial theory, spatiality as it is sometimes dubbed? What is the importance of spatiality in cultural studies? Let us have a quick tour of this area. Now, primarily, Bachelard makes a distinction between place and space. Space for him is not the physicality of an environment. The world is full of places. It is the human intervention that makes a place a space. A space is created when it is designed for living. If a community of human beings clear a forest area, start building a settlement, start agriculture, start building houses, start building irrigation mechanisms, start building plumbing, mechanisms, the place is successfully converted into a space. There are extensions. In like you can think of virtual spaces created by human beings. Humanity, human civilization, human intervention is all about creating spaces. We have places around us, we convert them into spaces. And spatiality, therefore, is a study of, that is why, in the beginning, we mentioned spatiality as a study of human evolution as such, civilizational evolution as such. Civilization is all about creating spaces. Civilization is all about converting places into spaces. Identifying the construction of a space, theorizing the construction of a space, using that theory to understand art, culture, politics, governmentality. This is basically the scope of spatiality studies. Spatiality studies is a very active subsection of cultural studies now. How space is understood by theorists. We even have like postmodern geographists, like people like Edward Soja, for instance, who wrote a whole book titled Postmodern Geography. Postmodernity and the study of geography, putting them together. Like you have this idea of postmodern geography, and Edward Soja would say how it is, geography is not what you see. Geography is how your sense, your consciousness, your civilizational common sense, how it interprets the world around you. There is also this idea of human geography. We will come to that in a minute. Well, to go back to where we began, the dichotomy between place and space, and prioritizing of conceptual space. Conceptual space in the sense like, there are lived spaces, but these lived spaces are also conceptual spaces. Imagine a traffic, for instance. Traffic is taken as, like traffic signs, traffic junctions, the way a road bends, or the way a road is constructed. We look at it as natural, but it is not, right? Constructing a road, creating a system of traffic, this is a key activity in modern civilization, but this activity is completely artificial. It is not natural. Creating a system of traffic, regulating a system of traffic, like what should be the color of the light that should tell you to stop your vehicle, when should you move your vehicle, when should you take a like a stop in the road. How is that whole thing regulated centrally? There is a central mechanism that regulates traffic in a city. The space of the road is not just a physical space, it is also a conceptual space. The human beings who drive vehicles around in that space will have to agree to a few sets of rules regarding traffic, which means like riding or driving a machine is not just a physical it's not just a matter of training, it is also a matter of agreement. You cannot drive a vehicle just by understanding the machine. You need to understand a human system called traffic to successfully drive a vehicle. Now, we are talking about traffic. This theory is applicable to any space. This is applicable to a classroom. Like you create a classroom and you say this is how a classroom must be constructed. A classroom is almost like a theater where you have the audience and then the teacher is trying to like transact whatever message he or she has to this audience. A virtual space will have another conception of classroom. There could be a different way in which a classroom can be organized, imagined. But all those imaginations come out of our sense of spatiality. Human civilization is also about rethinking spaces, rethinking the coordination of spaces. How should you arrange a certain space? What is the function of a theater, an auditorium? What is the function of a bus station, an airport? Foucault famously would talk about non-spaces in urbanity. He talks about how there are places where one doesn't have to belong. The examples that I have just taken, airport or a bus station or a railway station, these are major spaces in every modern civilization. These are spaces in a subject's transit. Like if I am moving from one place to another, I have to move through a bus station, I have to move through a railway station, I have to move through an airport. An airport is not a place where I connect by means of my identity. If I have a ticket and if I have a pass, if I have a license, if I pay money and obtain the sanction of travel, then that space welcomes me, irrespective of my identity, irrespective of my ideological preferences. Those are non-spaces. Foucault identifies a railway station, an airport, a bus station, these places of transit as non-spaces. They are non-spaces typically because a space is that conceptual realm where you're required to put in a little bit of your human element. Like my religion or my caste or my class or my gender, these are spaces. Or let's say there are spaces where I identify with reference to my gender, with reference to my caste, with reference to my religion, with reference to my community. The world is generally about these spaces. The human world that we move around is all about spaces that call into question these multiple elements that go into the creation of my identity. So if I call myself a Christian or a Muslim or a Hindu, there is a space that I'm claiming. From the community, I'm claiming that space. If I identify my caste and if I'm claiming that I belong to X caste or Y caste, then I'm claiming a space. That could be a space of privilege, that could be a space of anguish, that could be a space of struggle. These struggles, these privileges, Foucault would say these are minimized. These struggles, these privileges, etc., are minimized, if not cancelled, in the non-spaces. So a civilization is basically an arrangement of spaces and non-spaces. Spaces where your identity is at stake and spaces where your identity can be forgotten. And there are differences between, Bachelard would make a distinction between an urban space and a rural space, for that matter. If you look into a rural space, it calls into question your identity more rigorously than an urban space. It is difficult for you to move through a village without identifying yourself as part of the village community. You are constantly asked by the rural population, by the community, virtually or directly, to identify yourselves. Identify yourselves in terms of all the identity markers that we have talked about earlier. But there is an urban space where it is possible for you to be relatively anonymous, relatively forgetful of your identity. And sometimes we feel like the freedom in an urban space is a function of our ability to purchase, our ability to move through the market using money. It is about changing your perspective a little bit. It is about bringing a slight tilt to the way you look at how things happen. Okay, imagine you're a researcher of films, cinema, for instance. You can bring space as an angle to this research. How was cinema viewed in the beginning? How did theaters, cinema exhibiting theaters, how did they become the rule of the day? And when that space morphs itself, when there is like a virtual space, when you have something like a smartphone on which you can have your where you can log in onto an OTT platform and watch movies, how does that spatial difference make a conceptual difference, make an analytical difference? That could be one angle through which space can be brought into the study of films. You can bring space into the study of literature. You see, oral cultures, for instance, oral cultures which did not have written down archives of poetry, they would use rhymes, they would use alliteration, they would use a lot of techniques of sound so that you remember the poem. Almost all the religions in the world started as oral cultures. So you would find that almost all the scriptures are verses, they are all written in poetry. It is when we say written, you shouldn't take it as like, everything was not written down in the beginning, everything was like remembered in the beginning. It was remembered as sound in the beginning. So poetry requires rhyme, poetry requires meter, because poetry is to be remembered. But when print became popular, when print became common, when print kind of swallowed oral logics, poetry itself suffered a setback. See, novels became the most preferred genre of literature. Why? Because writing down a novel is basically a sensible activity in the context of print modernity. Rhymes, alliterations, techniques that would help a culture to keep a poem moving from one generation to another generation, those techniques became obsolete. You did not need those techniques anymore because the poems were written down. Once a poem is written down on a page, it does not rhyme. Unless you recite it, it does not rhyme. It is a silent print thing. So the analysis of a print poem will have to take into account the amount of blank space it leaves on a page. Literally, like your analysis of poetry now will have to look at, how is this poem printed? It's a poem because it is printed in a certain manner. It does not begin from the left end of a page and it does not move to the right end of the page. The line is cut. So, it is a visual reading that you make of a poem now. We are not reading a poem as in its original oral version. We are reading a poem as a printed reality. And when you do that, the amount of space that is left out in the page, the way the print orients, the lines, these things matter more than rhyme or meter or alliteration or all those techniques that were used in written culture civilizations, pre-written culture contexts. And when you move into the digital culture, this would change again. What is the space of a novel in digital culture? It doesn't have any space, in fact. You will see that shorter notes, online postings, news snippets, they are read more than novels now. Nobody reads a thick novel anymore because print modernity has suffered a setback, just like how oral culture suffered a setback in the previous era. We are moving into another phase of spatiality. So you see, there is a way in which you can read films using spatial ideas. There is a way in which you can read culture using spatial ideas. There is a way in which you can read life generally, traffic, caste, class, religion. See, caste, for instance, there is this tangent in Dalit studies. There is a way in which we understand untouchability as a function of space. The proximity that a subject can have with another subject belonging to a different caste is basically a space marker. So, caste as a function of space, religion as a function of space. This goes into this is basically a major tangent through which we can approach the study of caste, the study of religion, the study of human systems of classification. Edward Soja in his postmodern geography would talk about how there are tunnel-like geographies. Tunnel-like geographies in the sense like if you can have different kinds of spaces in a city. There could be a slum in a city. There could be a shopping mall in a city. There could be a university in a city. And Soja would say the community that lives in the space of the university is likely to connect with the space of a shopping mall and ignore the existence of a space like slum. So there you have a human geography being drawn against or on top of actual geography. The recognition of the space of a shopping mall by a community that lives in a university or say a housing complex area, for them the geography is different. When they imagine the geography in which they are living, they would see sites of urbanization, sites of urban prosperity, sites of urban flourish as visible, as real, and sites of poverty, sites of setback, sites of decadence, sites of slum dwelling, sites where underprivileged people live. Those sites will be pushed to the periphery. So there, you have a different kind of human geography building up. With what are the spaces that you would identify as yours? What are the spaces that you would identify as livable, as preferable, as what are the favorable spaces? It depends on the subject position. It depends on who decides, who travels, who moves around, who configures the human geography in which he or she is a part of, in which they are a part of. So this, as I have told you, this spatiality, study of spatiality, study of how spaces are important, study of how whether it is like literature or film or like culture in general, how space is a major angle through which you can make sense of these realities. This is what spatiality studies would basically talk about. Thank you.